Um, I do want to touch into on something that also has been central in the ACA program. Just this idea, and you coined the phrase, "Don't talk, don't trust, don't tell." Don't talk, don't
Yep.
feel, don't
Trust.
trust.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
So, in coming in discussing this with other people in recovery, I've heard sort of folks say, "Well, it's not like we never talked about anything, right? Or it's not like we weren't allowed to feel, and I could show up with a smile and talk about how I felt good, and right? Or it's not like I didn't trust, everything. I could trust maybe that there was a food on the table." So I'm curious if you can maybe expand a little bit on the don't talk, don't
Yeah.
trust, don't feel
Yeah.
framework and kind of what you really mean by that.
What I really mean by that is we learned how not to talk honestly about what was really going on, particularly emotionally. I found that by the time kids were 9 years of age, they had a denial system around emotions. They had the inability often to even identify their feelings by the time they were 9, 10, 11 years of age. So that's what I mean. We do not talk honestly. I cannot tell you when I go to school, I cannot tell you how frightening it was to be at home last night listening to my parents rage and argue at each other. When I go to school, I cannot tell you that I had to crawl across my living room floor last night because I was afraid my dad was going to shoot, bullets through the window. That's what I mean when I learned it was not okay to talk honestly. And it's usually not okay to talk honestly about how I'm being impacted emotionally by the chaos, the drama, or maybe even the violence that's going on. When I say you learn how not to feel, we usually have the ability to identify. We have a couple of safe feelings. We have, sort of which feelings were safe for you to feel in your house. Somebody will say, my house was a really loud house, and anger was like, everybody was angry about everything. So I don't have a problem letting people know when I'm angry. But what I can't let people know is how scared I was. I can't let people know how sad I was. I can't. I didn't ever use that word embarrassment. So of course, there are certain feelings that were safe for us. But what were the feelings that were not safe? And it's usually the majority of the feelings were not safe. When people say, I don't talk, don't feel, it's okay to put a smile on your face. It's okay to let people know that you were fine, but you can't let them know about anything else. So we just need to take the extreme out of it. I didn't mean it literally. And when we say you don't trust, I find that when you cannot trust the most significant people in your life, people in that parenting role, you end up generalizing that inability to trust to other people. If I cannot trust my mom or dad, what makes me think I'm really going to be able to trust the school teacher? They don't even love me. I mean, they like me, but they don't even love me. And what we have to remember is that this is my experience on a daily basis. Daily, weekly, monthly, annually, year after year. And in time, in the beginning, I wanted to trust and I tried to trust, and pretty soon people were just too untrustworthy. And then that also accentuates into the people outside of that family system. I've had people say, well, I don't trust anybody else, but I certainly trust myself. I'm the only one I can trust. So we just take it out of the extreme. When you're raised with unpredictability, unreliability, that's the foundation of being able to trust. We need people to be consistent in our lives, predictable, reliable. That doesn't happen in most addictive family systems. Now, again, I want to go back to, there are differences. There's differences within a family system. If I'm one of the older kids in this family, maybe there was a time in my growing up years where things were not as severe in my mother or father's addiction. And so I had some foundation for trust, more so than my younger brother or sister, because by the time they came into our family, people were much further along in the disease progression. So there was much more instability, much more unpredictability. So you will see differences in siblings, oftentimes just because of birth order. And we have to remember, with addiction, is a progression. And so I may have come into this world, my dad was in his earlier stage. By the time my younger sister comes in, my dad is middle stage and it's all chaos. So there's more reasons that she would have more trust issues than I would have trust issues. But the roles that don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, that is just signature for the majority of ACAs. And I think that when people really want to say, well, that's not quite true, um, we need to listen to them. That's their voice. But what's the barrier for them? What's the fear of what will happen should they get in touch with what it really means? And I think the fears are so great. I think the greatest fear is if I get in touch with the depth of my sadness, I will implode, explode. I will curl up on the floor, not be able to get up. Somebody's going to tell me I'm stupid. Um, we really need to take a look what are our fears and try and put them into a realistic perspective. The fears are usually based in 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, not necessarily reality today, but we've never challenged them. We've never brought them into our consciousness to challenge them.